Well, welcome everyone. We are expecting quite a few more people, so hopefully they will trickle in. But you all get gold stars for being right on time. I'm pretty sure I know all of you. If I have not met you, my name's Louise Misztal. I'm the executive director at Sky Island Alliance, and really glad you could join us this evening for this conservation briefing. We like to take some time every few months and a couple times throughout the year to get to say hello to all of you that are really helping keep our programs going and give you some hot new hot off the presses information and give you some updates on what's coming up next. So thanks for joining us. And we have some board members with us. I'll just say who they are so you know these lovely folks are helping lead the organization and putting lots of work in to keep us running smoothly. So Tim Warnett is with us, and Michael Van Allsburg is with us, who's one of our co-chairs on the board. And what else? I want to take a minute to do a land acknowledgement. I went to a really nice meeting this morning at which land acknowledgements were featured. So the Sky Island Alliance office, which is where I'm coming to you from here in Tucson, is on the land of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui and other indigenous peoples. And our work throughout the Sky Island region on both sides of the US-Mexico border takes place on indigenous lands. So we're working to acknowledge the lack of truth and reconciliation with Native nations, and commit to continuing to educate ourselves about this process and mobilizing to stand in solidarity with present-day tribes and support indigenous people who are acting to restore their rights and protect the land that we all call home. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's any more housekeeping before we get started. I think we're good to go. So we have a little bit different program for those of you that have been with us the last few times. We have Zach Palma joining us tonight, as well as Emily Burns. So Zach is our Mexico projects manager. He brings a wealth of experience with science, studies in science, work in environmental education and permaculture, social justice, and sustainable rural agriculture. We were really fortunate to get to work with Zach when he was at the Coronado National Memorial working with the Park Service, and we were fortunate to snatch him up and get to work with him now as a colleague at Sky Island Alliance, and he's doing some great work with our Sonoran team. And so he's gonna speak first, and then we have Emily Burns, who I'm pretty sure most of you have met, our program director. She's helping lead all of our programs and create an amazing comprehensive vision, but she's done a lot of work over the last few years to launch many of the programs that you'll be seeing here tonight and that I'm sure you love, like photofauna and border wildlife study, and just really bring a good science lens to our work and help communicate what we're doing to the public. So we will start off with Zach, and he has some slides to share, and I will be quiet. Oh, I will say, please feel free if you have questions, you can raise your hand, you can pop something in the chat. Feel free to ask questions like that as we move along. I'll keep an eye on things, and we can pause for questions too, but really it's a small group and we want to answer any questions you all have and share the work with you. So feel free to pipe in if you have questions. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Zach.
Awesome. Thanks, Louise. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Very thankful for everyone's support. Just want to make sure that's spoken in the beginning, because we're a pretty passionate team and we really care about what we do, and having support really makes things go a long way. So I'm going to jump off. We're going to kind of do a little bit of a tour through the Sky Islands region, kind of go through not all the work we do because we'd be here quite a while, but some of the big projects we go through. And I will start kind of on the southern area. So for those, it sounds like most of you are pretty aware of what we do as Sky Island Alliance, but I'll kind of start with the big picture. So again, my name is Zach Palma. I'm the Mexico Projects Manager. So everything south of the border is is kind of my arena, but as we are a smaller nonprofit, we holistically kind of take on our larger mission. So, which we really focus on three areas: land and community. This is our people. This is our people work. I'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means specifically for our work in Sonora, but across both countries in our region, we can have happy, healthy, functional landscapes and ecological systems, but without the connection within our communities, whether it's urban or rural, we wouldn't be achieving our goal, right? Our mission. So we have a really heavy focus on working with people, especially people on the land. Our second area is water. As we know, we're in a arid to semi-arid region, and so water is everything. Whether it's riparian areas, whether it's springs, whether it's integrating water usage, water advocacy, water law, across the board, water's big for us. And of course, wildlife, the charismatic friends that kind of can give us a lot of connection, to our region with the diversity that we see across the region. And a big thing for us, as we'll talk a little bit about the unique part that makes our ecological region, is the connectivity and movement of wildlife. And today, we're going to talk specifically through the lens of looking at one species, the black bear that you can see in this picture. And this species, most of us are familiar with, right, is found throughout the country, if we're thinking of the United States. But our area is very unique. The Madrean Sky Islands region, we have many areas of biotic factors coming together. And we have mountain ranges, we have desert, we have quite the diversity, right? And so the black bear is, in a way, a symbol of a lot of the work that we do, being that it's found throughout the region, right? On the left map, you can see these are photofauna checklists, or rather locations of cameras that we receive checklists. We have over 130 registrations of black bear, as you can see in Arizona, a little bit into New Mexico, and within Sonora. So we have this species throughout our region. Within Mexico, the black bear is an endangered species. And a big part why I mentioned that it's kind of a symbol of our region is that it's a species that can cover large ranges, right? It's a long-ranging species. It needs connective corridors. It needs pristine habitat to be a successful species. And that's something that we see, even though it's not listed species within the US, that can be affected by a lot of the work that we're doing to preserve and restore these ecological systems. And so through this lens, again, as I mentioned, it's an endangered species in Mexico. A lot of our work focusing specifically on the success of the black bear trickles down into the success of the Madrean Sky Islands region. I feel like we could jump real in, but the biggest part, a lot of is, again, that people community side of things. And when we can get folks on board with the work that we do, sometimes it's helpful to have a charismatic face be the part of restoration and preservation, right? So the black bear, again, is kind of that figure. We have a lot of success, utilizing this figure and working towards that success within Mexico and Arizona. And this little, the slide jumped a bit, but just kind of highlighting for those that might not be as familiar with the Madrean Sky Islands region, just a quick little outline. So we're going to start down on the southern side of the border with a little bit of our program work in Sonora, Mexico. So one of the biggest projects we've been focusing on, and this has been in the works for years, 4 years, really 5, with the beginning steps, the seeds being planted. But Sky Islands Alliance, with additional support from the National Park Service, has been working directly with Área de Protección de Flora y Fauna, or a lot of times APFF Bavispe, formerly known as Ajos Bavispe, which is an extension of the Mexican federal government. And you can see in the map to the left has basically scattered protected areas within the Sky Islands of Sonora, Mexico. And this project, why I chose to highlight it here, is because it is of such importance, right? We might, for those of us who are very familiar with southeastern Arizona, we're lucky to have the Sky Islands. Most of these mountainous islands under some type of land management protection, whether it's Forest Service, National Park Service, whatever it might be. Within Mexico, this is the only true legal status besides any, legal conservation status besides any private managed areas. So this has been a big focus. This is really important, not just for us, but other nonprofit community organizations to work with, as well as empower this, as we say in Spanish, área natural protegida, or a natural protected area within Mexico. So some of our work, if you want to jump to the next slide, Emily, is exactly what's happening in this picture. Planning, working together, drafting, revising, working with important figures within the region. And so essentially in the beginning of this project, we formed what we call the core working group with Profauna, Naturalia, and Wildlands Network, very great organizations within Mexico that have history working within the region, very, very knowledgeable, very integrated, and has formed with ourselves, Sky Island Alliance, an excellent team to not only be the expert kind of advisors of the government employees of Bavispe, but also the ones who are saying, we're going to get this through to the finish line, right? Because as we know, in government, there can be a lot of turnover. There can be a lot of issues related to funding, right? As the years go on, budgets, many things can change. And as we see, this is essentially the legal teeth for this protected area. This, in this image, it's in Spanish, but it's just an example of what essentially this whole book as a management plan we're working on to create and publish will essentially be a legal structure for how this natural protected area will be managed and how it can be legally be justified and what it needs. And this is really important for a lot of the work we see coming in the future, is that this dictates essentially the annual plans that will be the implementation of this great work that will be done within the Sky Islands. And a little bit of the timeline, as I mentioned, it's been in the works for many years, for many factors. Pandemic definitely could be one of those thrown out there. But we're really excited to be publishing this. I'm hesitant to just say the word, but having this published for 2024, and that goes through the process with Mexico City, with the central office. But we've finally gotten to the phase that it's in Mexico City's hands, and that we will have a true management plan for Área de Protección de Flora y Fauna Bavispe. Next slide. And as we work towards that, so it's a kind of a multi-component piece. This part of the project is really end goal, having a management plan. That is of absolute necessity. But as we work with this, we really don't want to let off the momentum of, as I mentioned, being able to empower and really create more visibility for this natural protected area. And so in here, you can see a few images of different events and activities we do side by side with the forest rangers from Bavispe. We have the second annual Sky Islands Festival down in Moctezuma, Sonora. This year is really focusing specifically on Bavispe and the visibility and their interaction with the communities. Here's a BioBlitz coming up that we'll be working with forest rangers on. And another part of that is, as you can see in the bottom left, is expanding their knowledge of wildlife movement and presence within the reserve. And so these are just kind of preliminary projects that we're working on as we grow our presence and our relationship with this natural area. And the goal is that they're the biggest actors that hopefully will be around forever within the Sky Islands region of Sonora, Mexico, and that we continue to build and expand on our relationship and what we can do to support and offer to Bavispe. So really excited. We're working with an excellent young director who's motivated, and there's a few more pieces to this puzzle that I'll mention in a bit that are very exciting on how this how the work that they do isn't just connected to the success of the Sky Islands in Sonora, but also into the binational context. Next slide. So gonna jump channels a little bit. This is what I really enjoy talking about and enjoy doing. And not to say that all of our work is not any less important. But as Louise mentioned in the beginning, I have a lot of experience in kind of working with people and humans on the land, whether it's permaculture, sustainable agriculture, those types of things. And that's why I really enjoy what our Sonoran program's doing with the folks that we work with in Sonora, whether they're our own contractors, employees, or partner organizations and partner ranches. Our Ranchos Regenerativos program, or regenerative ranching, is just that. It's meeting folks who culturally, for hundreds of years, in some cases, have lived on the land. And instead of looking at what are the negative impacts of humans and how does that relate to thriving ecosystems, rather we look at these humans and these activities are culturally integrated into the land. How can we learn from them, and how can we also build a more sustainable future as them being the stewards of this land, right? And just to give some context, Sonora, it's a very big state. If we drove, I don't know, from the border here in Arizona all the way down to the southern corner, that would be at least 9-hour drive. It's a very big state. Over 80% is dedicated to ranching. And that's a mixture of high desert, low desert, pristine grasslands, not so great grasslands, and everything in between. And so really what our program really focuses on is, as I mentioned, in the end, us not necessarily walking away, but maintaining a relationship with the ranch where they confidently have the resources to not only manage a ranch, a productive, economically productive ranch, but also utilize that ranch in the regeneration of the ecosystem and those functions. Next slide, Emily. And so a big part of this, and a little context on this program, is that it's something that Sky Island Alliance has always focused on, and not just us as an organization, but something that we really have over the last couple of years have focused on the relationship building aspect, the people aspect. And sometimes for me, that can be challenging, especially in our culture within the United States. You know, work is work, right? And sometimes the talking and getting to know people can feel slow, especially when you have an agenda and you want to get to points. But this, I really wanted to mention this phase of our work because it is so crucial. It's so crucial for our organization to be in the communities, to be on the ranches, to be working, physically, sometimes with a pick or a shovel in your hand. Because if we come in with our agenda, right, that we want healthy, happy animals and water and hydrological systems and all of these things that we preach, it doesn't work like that until there's trust. And once that trust is built, once those relationships can be made, it's a beautiful thing to be able to work with these ranches and see what they do on their own, once they're given these tools and these resources. Next slide. And so a little bit, we do quite a bit of work, a diversity of work, I should say, within ranches. It's a lot of stuff that can mimic what we do in Arizona, but again, through the context of this landscape, part of the function is a business. It's to produce cattle, and many times in northern Sonora is to export that cattle to the United States. What we focus on, and as some of these pictures will show, is how we can have that ranch be productive in the long run, but how it can really steward a healthy natural system. And that is really focused on ranch management and specific restoration activities. So just to mention a few, a lot of the work we've been doing has been funded from a diversity of funders. Some of that being the New York Community Trust Fund. Again, National Park Service has been really supportive of this. Recently, we've been building an excellent relationship with the Program of Development of Mexico with the United Nations, utilizing some funds from Coca-Cola. And I'll talk a bit more about that specific project. But this work really takes on the regenerative steps, because a lot of times in the beginning, once we have a relationship developed, really focus on, okay, what's here? What's the status of this ecosystem or ecosystems within this ranch? Okay, now what are the steps that we can do to bring back some of the bigger, the thriving ecological systems of this landscape? And a lot of times that will be really focused on, as you can see partially in the bottom right picture, exclusion fencing, right? Is there a riparian system? In what status is that? How is the water? What are the springs like? A lot of times step one is exclude the cattle, keep them out, let things restore. We can come back and reevaluate. And right now we're doing an exciting project on measuring the regeneration of vegetation within this riparian system that I'll mention in a moment. And so a lot of times it's a mix with studying and implementing this restoration work. A lot of times it's water retention. We focus on this and it's kind of like a hydrological perspective. The top two pictures really dive into this. A big focus of our work this last year was moving rocks. It was building erosion control structures, was trying to counteract the damage that's been done by erosion that can be alluded to a mixture of climate change, but in some cases overgrazing and the loss of vegetation. And so by building rock structures, we can retain moisture, we can retain soil, we can bring back vegetation and really essentially bring back parts of that ecological health where we're implementing these structures. And on the right, you can see a different approach to a very similar goal. This is what a lot of folks will call contour lines. They're essentially with a machine, which feels very intensive in the beginning. And I've struggled with this, but there's a lot of success seen in this region in Mexico of implementing these contour lines that essentially trap the moisture instead of let rainwater run off down the slope. And in some cases, loss of soil and erosion can happen, thus loss of vegetation. the bottom left two pictures is a big component. And as you can imagine, whether you've been around ranches or not, a big challenge with ranches by throwing out large mammals, large herbivores, is the problem with carnivores, right? That's something we work throughout the region to support the species and the movement of to support these animals. And there's a diversity of these species. And in this picture, we have a puma, but as we know, there's jaguar, there's ocelot, there's bobcat, there's a whole diversity of carnivores throughout our area. And a big part of that work is the connection. What is the role of these animals on the landscape? They are not here specifically to eat your cattle. Rather, they're here because they live here and they have their food species. And it happens, in this case, the puma, that a lot of those species that they like to eat are also the species that humans like to hunt. So now we're talking about, okay, how are we managing game species, right? Are we shooting everything we can, or are we regulating? In Mexico, the systems are different. There are permits, there are harvest capacities. There is a structure to hunt, but it's a little less regulated as you would see within the United States or in Arizona. So a lot of that is coming down to the rancher themselves. Are they letting folks in to hunt, or are they maintaining their populations of deer, of javelina, of turkey, of whatever it might be? And so that's when we kind of start having this conversation of the chain of the connection between carnivores and, human hunting and human harvesting off the land. And just to give a little connection between that, this picture here is of a puma at a ranch called Agua de en Medio. The rancher Eduardo is in the picture right next to it, setting up a trail camera. They have not had hunting on the ranch for 4 years. There are several puma residents on the ranch, and as of this year, there has not been a loss of calves or young cattle to predation. And so essentially that is the ultimate connection we're looking for. If we maintain healthy species, healthy populations of these carnivores, that's not going to affect a cattle ranch in a negative way. All right, next slide. So I'm not going to dive too much into this because sometimes I can get going and just want to talk about a lot of stuff. But this is kind of our I like to say, regional demonstration ranch or series of ranches. And there's a list on the right there. You can see a lot of the work we've been doing. But Eduardo, who is a rancher in that last picture, has just been an excellent example of what we see as something that can grow throughout the region. And this project, to mention again, which we're implementing in Cañón de Evans, is managed by the UN with their development program. And essentially, this is what we envision. The future is ranches can take on all of these levels of restoration and protection with the goal of creating a productive, sustainable, resilient ranch. As you can see, there's a lot of different activities that go into that. What we hope to do, what we plan to do, is utilize this with a lot of research into the restoration activities to be able to replicate essentially throughout the Skyline region in Sonora and in Arizona where applicable as well. Next slide, Emily. All right, so I hope I'm not seeing any in the chat or anything, but if there's any questions on our ranching program, I would love to chat more and answer any of those questions. Again, this is that last ranch, Agua de en Medio, looking at Sierra Los Ajos, just not even 20 miles south of the border. All right, next slide. And for the last piece I'm going to touch on here well, essentially this is both countries, talking about Arizona and Sonora, US and Mexico. But a really exciting project that we're working on. I think the appropriate way would be to say bringing back the Sister Park program is essentially a program with the National Park Service and CONAP, but the National Park Service manages it on their own globally. Any national park site can essentially develop a relationship with other national parks or reserves or those types of federally protected areas in other countries. And where we are on the border, sharing the same ecological systems between both countries in the Sky Islands region, it only makes sense that these federal agencies should be working together. And so what we've been doing over the last year is trying to officially revive this program that was active in the 2000s and prior, and with some movement in after 2010. But essentially, as we know, as I mentioned, within the government, we have a lot of turnover, a lot of relationships can be lost, and communication doesn't always happen. So that's where Sky Island Alliance comes in. We're kind of the middle actors between these agencies. And we're working on some exciting projects for this year, finishing up, and some big stuff for next year. Next slide. So some of these initial activities, actually, let me start by saying some of the end goal that we're talking about before I talk about what we've been up to this year. The end goal is to have, by the Department of Interior, by CONAP, the Mexican federal agency, have official agreements signed. And we are cooperating national parks or natural protected areas, and that we have a list of these priority areas that we work together on. That's what we're working toward. In the meantime, again, relationships. That is the biggest key part to keeping this flowing and keeping this sustainable through time. So here's a picture of a BioBlitz we did at Coronado National Memorial. On the left, you can see some folks. Those are Bavispe forest rangers that we were able to get over. We had an awesome full day of registering biological presence within the National Memorial. We had some awesome pan dulce, sweetbread, and coffee in the morning with a big Sister Parks meeting, and really focusing on, all right, where are we going with this? What do we want to do? What are overlap areas? But again, before that can happen, folks need to be together, face to face, talking, and getting through uncomfortabilities, right? A lot of times, if someone's from a different culture, speaks a different language, we might not be able to get past that step before we want to meet halfway. Next slide. So the exciting work that we have coming up for next year is we've been funded by the National Park Service to essentially bring folks together at a conference, relationship building, training, series of days in Tucson next year. But really, this isn't just a focus on the Sky Islands region. Of course, that's where our main interest is at Sky Island Alliance. That's where our home base is. That's where we work. But as you can see in this map, the green polygons with names, there's a diversity of Mexican national parks or biospheres or protected areas, as well as U.S. national parks, national monuments, what have you. And so the idea is, even though these do expand a bit more of a diversity of area, is to really bring these agencies together, to really have us focusing on how can we work together across the border, because more and more that can be challenging, right? The infrastructure on the border is just one level of how that can be a barrier, but also a need to work together as we think about connectivity. And so just wanted to show this map to give a little context of the potential partners that should be participating this get together, the Sister Parks, essentially Borderlands regional meeting next year in Tucson, that we're very excited to have folks ideally from Washington, D.C. and Mexico City present, so that we can work towards getting legal documents and agreements, so we can work towards these goals one step at a time. Next slide. And to wrap this section up, some of the work we've been doing again in the meantime, just to get folks together to kind of bridge the gap on the border, is utilizing our Path of the Jaguar internship. Every year we have folks in Arizona and folks in Sonora, youth, sometimes undergraduates, sometimes recent graduates, folks interested in the natural sciences and natural world. And this last year with our Sonoran interns, we have 3 in the bottom left, Stephanie, Karen, and Alondra, wonderful, awesome, motivated young women. And they essentially participated in working with Skyline Alliance, as well as working with CONAP and the National Park Service, to bridge these gaps, not only educate each agency about their corresponding, their partners in Mexico or the US, but also work with these agencies in the field with resource management, with education, interpretation, to also go back to their communities and their studies and share what they've learned. So again, kind of these first steps to bridge these gaps, create these relationships, and not make these 2 countries that are right next to each other feel so distant, when in all reality, we're right here, right next to each other. I think with that, unless there's any questions, I can always get to them at the end. I will turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for that tour through Sonora. I definitely want to go right now, head down there. We're going to continue the journey north over the border now and highlight some of the wonderful things that have been happening and some new stuff coming up in Arizona. We won't cover everything that we have going on, but we're going to start with what's been happening at the border. And as Zach started off this conservation briefing talking about black bear, nothing drives home the point to us more than the fact that the border itself is a major challenge. Being able to connect populations of black bear in Arizona and New Mexico with Sonora. We have a number of cameras. We have over 110 cameras distributed along the border. Most are on the US side, though some and increasingly more are in Sonora, which is exciting. And we're documenting the movement, the behavior, and the number of occurrences of where we're seeing mammals in the borderlands and right at the border. Black bear in particular is fascinating because so far it's one of the species that we have not observed being able to pass through sections of the border wall itself, even when the floodgates are open. So here's a video showing a black bear walking in Southeast Arizona. This bear is walking west on the border road on the US side at San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge, a very common sight for us to be seeing bear walking, looking for the next sky island. We see them near the San Pedro River exhibiting the same behavior. This bear is also walking west. Here it is walking along the border road. This is about 1 mile west of the San Pedro River. And then here's one of these cameras that we have on the Sonoran side looking at the wall. And I want to highlight this. It may not be apparent at first glance, but right here, this is the small wildlife opening. This is what the federal government puts in for official wildlife crossing structures. They call them cat doors. Well, it's a cat door, but it's not a bear door. So you can imagine a big chunky bear like this is not going to be able to cross through that. We're really interested to know where bear are actually crossing back and forth because, as Zach mentioned, bear are one of those species that are endangered in Mexico. And the ability to help sustain the population of American black bear in Sonora is having source populations in the United States. Which brings me to some good news. There are large larger wildlife openings that are getting installed in the border wall as a result of litigation between the Sierra Club and ACLU and other plaintiffs and the Department of Homeland Security. So we're hopeful that we'll start seeing some wildlife-friendly structures being put into the border wall. But one of the other things that's really good to know is that once the connectivity is reestablished, we are seeing a lot of animals use areas. So those hope for some of those larger openings that they may help more animals pass back and forth between our two countries. And one of the examples of that is the shipping container, we'll call it affectionately the junkyard wall that was put up fall of last year. About this time, I was doing a lot of hand wringing, and many of us were extremely concerned to watch these shipping containers being placed in the Huachuca Mountains near Sierra Vista. They were stacked double high, and over a series of months, the state was able to construct a wall that was 3 miles long. It's right in the heart of our border wildlife study, and we witnessed a lot of animal movement before the shipping containers were installed. And then we looked at what happened to the wildlife when they encountered the wall once the wall was built. And now we're getting to see the recovery and the reconnection of animals along that 3-mile stretch. And it's been just a fabulous thing to see the change on this landscape. Here's a mountain lion that was walking through the area using the border road. That's a common place for animals to move, moving in parallel with the wall before the containers were removed. And then we saw this interesting change. So we were registering about 1.3 animals on each camera per day as a rate before the shipping containers went in this area. We saw a decrease in the number of animals that were present along the shipping container wall while they were there. It may be because their access was cut off. It was also because of the heavy human and construction presence, the noise, the vehicle traffic. It was a busy place while the wall was up there. So we did see a decrease, but excitingly, the animal movement and presence along the border went up as soon as those shipping containers were taken off by March this year. And we got to see bear. We got to see bear walking from Sonora into the southern Huachuca Mountains, like this beautiful one. And this one as well. So this is what we love to see. We love to see borders that are permeable, where the animals can make the decision whether they're moving back and forth between Sonora and Arizona. And for us, it's a bit of a success and a really exciting thing to see, to learn what happens when an obstacle like the shipping container wall goes in and with all the disruption of habitat that occurs, and then looking at the wildlife reoccupation of that habitat and movement corridors once the obstacle is removed. In the same area, we are starting a new project to remove the footprint of some of the road prisms in Coronado National Forest. You may be familiar with this map and this image. Well, we were just showing you where the shipping container wall was on this side in the southern Huachuca Mountains. This is the area where we've been running our border wildlife study for over 3 years. And this area is full of roads. Some of them were put in by the forest many years ago. Some of them are informal roads that were just put in by people recreating on the forest. Most of them are in terrible shape, and they're places where there's a lot of soil erosion, loss of oak woodland forest because the network is so dense. And we have a really great opportunity to help heal the habitat, including the roads that were made much worse by the state and their shipping container construction. So with support from Coronado National Forest and the National Forest Foundation, we are going to be starting what will be a multi-year road rewilding project. And this is just a snapshot of what we'll be rolling out in the next week or so, of an invitation for volunteers to download the map of the area and the roads that need to be removed, go visit the area and collect some critical data that can help us figure out which road segments to tackle first by zipping them up, putting them back, and then helping the oak woodland forest get reestablished. So this map shows the San Rafael Valley in the middle, the Huachuca Mountains here, over here into the Patagonia Mountains, and all the purple segments are ones that have been administratively decommissioned in 2019 after a years-long public planning process about which roads were no longer necessary to keep on the forest. Those roads were sitting on a list, but haven't been physically closed. And that's where we come in. And we'll be partnering with Borderlands Restoration Network as well to do this road rewilding project. Just as an example of what these roads look like, some of them are going to be relatively straightforward. They might have oaks growing on either side. You can see the 2-track, but with some strategically placed boulders, we can stop the vehicle traffic and nature will take over pretty quickly. In other places, because of where the road was running up and down, often they're now north-south roads where the rain just drains right down out of the mountains, we have deeper erosion issues, and we will be working on doing erosion control in places where leaving it alone means we'll continue to suffer more habitat loss and soil loss in the area. Also in this area, we've been working on some pond enhancement projects. There are 3 ponds that are just north of the border in the southern Huachuca Mountains. They are stock ponds that have been serving a whole number of species for a number of years. However, they've been heavily used by cattle. And as you can see, this bear visiting this tank, we want to improve the wildlife access to the water and the water quality. These are candidates for reintroduction for frogs. And what we're working with the forest on, and it's a funded project from Coronado National Forest, is to install wildlife-friendly fencing to help separate the cattle from the pond itself. And we'll be putting in separate drinkers for cattle outside of the fence line. So hopefully this is a project where everybody wins, the cattle will have something to drink, and yet we will allow the water quality to improve and hopefully see more oak forest regeneration around the footprint of the ponds as well. Rescuing springs, continuing to rehab water sources is so critical. You imagine these bears that are on their journey through the Sky Islands, they finally get across the border, they find a place without wall, and they're on the hunt for water. And so McGrew Spring in the Whetstone Mountains, it's in Kartchner Caverns State Park, is one of these places where, with the help of so many volunteers, we've been able to do a pretty dramatic shift for this spring. It's one of the places where both the park and our own spring seeker volunteers have been monitoring the condition of McGrew Spring for over 10 years. And we've seen a degradation that happened when the fences fell down and cattle came in. Cattle remove native vegetation, they foul the water, and they also bring a lot of invasive plants in there when they defecate around the water. So our volunteers have been putting up the wildlife-friendly fencing to get the cattle to back out of the spring site and pulling an invasive plant called horehound and getting that taken out. So if we keep the cattle out, hopefully that infestation won't come back in. And it's one of these really feel-good stories for us to see the bears come back. The bears have been coming in numbers to visit McGrew Spring over the last few months, and it makes us feel like we're really doing something to help them out by rescuing McGrew. And lastly, we're going to just go one or two more Sky Islands north to the Catalina Mountains, just north of Tucson. As you all know, the Bighorn Fire was a very severe fire that burned across the Sky Island in 2020. It burned over 120,000 acres. And in the course of a fire like this, it not only removes native vegetation, but it puts our water sources at risk as well if erosion and landslides blankets the springs that species depend on. So part of our work in working with Coronado National Forest is to address the erosion on the heels of the Bighorn Fire, to stabilize slopes, to help more water soak into the soil and into our upper watersheds, and then do spring rescue projects so that we can support native animals and plants and people that are recreating in the mountains. So here's one of our few pictures of bear up there, but they're up there in the Catalinas, and I'm sure they're excited we're doing this work too. Here's some pictures of the work that's going on up there. We're doing native plant installations, loose rock structures to help make sure there's surface water that's available in the pools of the springs. And we have more volunteer days for this work. So if you're interested in getting up into the mountains, Lots of opportunities to get up there, be at the higher elevation part of our Sky Islands, and help the forest heal after the Bighorn fire. So with that, I'm going to stop, and both Zach and I are very happy to answer questions. You're welcome to unmute and ask us, or feel free to type your questions into the chat and we'll look for those.
So I've got a couple initial questions from Sharon for Zach that came into the chat that she had a question about the riparian area that was pictured that crossed the border. I don't remember which slide that was, but I'm guessing it might have been.
Yeah, was it connected to our ranch work? Oh, the Borderlands Sister Park program photo, I bet. That would be the San Pedro River.
I think it was the only one that had a longitudinal north-south riparian zone across both borders. I mean, both countries.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to, well, we don't have to necessarily bring up, but that would be the San Pedro River. And I thought it was
That's what I thought, but I couldn't tell.
Okay. Yeah. Emblematic picture, especially talking about, governmental cooperation binationally, because that river is a water source for both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then also a couple of your maps and things had differential color markings on them, but no legend. So I couldn't tell what those markings meant.
Yeah. If you want to go back probably a slide or two, Emily, I can touch
yes,
on
this
that.
was the one. That was the one.
Okay. This one right here.
Yeah. So I did get that this one had the green areas were, and the unfortunately, it's either my old eyes or it's the legend itself.
It's pretty small.
It has some words after the green, and I'm not sure what they are.
Yep. So essentially in the green, and this is what kind of makes this area so unique, is that those polygons, all 5 of them, there's actually a tiny little island, but that is what makes up Bavispe as the protected area.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there were a couple of others too that you had that.
There was one on the ranch that had quite a lot. And I felt like maybe not just kind of, this
that.
Essentially the different colors can be matched to what we've already done, and also what we plan to do. And again, this is kind of that champion series of ranches that is our future.
Right, I got that.
What we like to replicate. What's that?
I got the part that it was the series of ranches, but the different colors like yellow and aqua and green and and red.
So if you can see the topography and the baseline, those are riparian exclusion fences.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the different polygons can be like on where the mouse is now. Those are drainages where we're doing erosion control. Like the teal blue is invasive species removal up in the right.
Okay.
Up on the north side, a different project of erosion control. And then the blue
on the different ranch plots.
Yep.
Okay,
exactly.
All right.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
And then it was also that contour thing that you showed early on. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, what are those contours made out of? Is it just earth moved, or what is it?
Earth moved. Essentially, it's not like an agricultural tractor, but a machine. And that's why I say it feels kind of intensive in the beginning, but basically with discs, essentially creates lines, have a surveyor or ourselves could go out and on contour, so on the same elevation line, basically digging a swale or a berm in English.
Yeah, so it's piled up earth.
Yep. And so on the side on the higher elevation, that's where it collects the water, and instead of running down slope,
right,
it hangs out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I got the principle of the idea because it's very much like what the Native Americans have done with, their little rock things that, put plants behind the rock so that it collects water and it grows.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah,
So it's essentially that on large scale, and that's kind of
right.
the contrast besides that. A lot of the rock work that Emily was showing too, that's a big part of us, hands, shovels, picks, but the
Right.
other side of it in grasslands can be done with a machine.
So Rhonda has a great question that I've been thinking about, but I don't know if I know the answer to yet. But maybe Emily and Zach can help. So she's wondering if we can take advantage of the new climate core. I haven't fully looked into the program, but I don't know, Emily or Zach, if you've had a chance to. I mean, I just saw the news today and was looking at that, thinking, oh, how does this interact with us?
I mean, my first answer is just, I certainly hope so. I
Yeah.
think this is the kind of way we love to do our work. We'll be looking into it as more emerges about the program. We work with Arizona Conservation Corps routinely. We're hoping to work with them next month if the federal government doesn't shut down. So this is a great way for us to be able to do more across the landscape. So we're going to look into it, and hopefully next time we all chat, we'll have an answer, a discrete answer about that.
Yeah, it's good news. All right, anybody else? I don't see anything else in the chat. Anybody wanna?
I'd like to ask a question, but my lighting is pretty dim. This is
Sure.
Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi. So first of all,
Uh-oh, you're cutting out. Let me see if I can.
it's probably just my connection. There's probably not anything that you can do. How bad is it?
You're
You're
back
back
now.
now.
You could
Okay.
try turning your camera off and see if that helps, maybe. I don't know.
Okay. That any better?
I can
We'll
hear
see.
you now.
Okay. So my question is about there was a map that showed kind of the Sky Islands area, and the Zach, you were talking about a meeting that's going to happen between many players, the national parks and other protected areas on both sides of the border. And there was no mention made of including Indigenous folks in that meeting. And I think it's super important. And I wonder if that's intentional, because sometimes working with governmental entities, that can be very complicated to then also include tribal governments. But to me, it's essential to start really early. So I want to ask what the thinking is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thanks for asking. And I think that can be, I can answer that focused on that specific project, but also kind of organizationally what our thought process is on that. For that project, we right now, this past week, the Mexican agency just got the green light that they can participate in this. So we're in the lucky, we still have the opportunity to basically create this, what we want it to be and what we need it to be. In some ways, work can be dictated by funders. And this coming from the National Park Service, their parks program is very like agency to agency. But that doesn't mean that, these tribal nations, these entities can't be involved. And that's something that we really want to build out specifically with Saguaro National Park, because they have a really good relationship with specifically the Tohono O'odham Nation. And they have tribal members as staff or as seasonal staff or partner relationships. So I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but that's something that we definitely, want to take advantage of, not just being inclusive, but, what can be learned through that. Because if we, I struggle a little bit with this in our area because, outside of the low desert with the Tohono O'odham Nation, they're there, they've been there, they're in both countries. But in the Sky Islands region, it's been removal, essentially, has been how history has played out. And so that's something that as an organization, we really want to grow that relationship because, unfortunately, there's not designated tribal lands currently here where there once was, right?
That's true, and still each of those places will have a long list of associated, most closely associated tribal nations that, if invited, may well be interested. The National Park Service right now, isn't Chuck Sams the head of the National Park Service right now? I believe he is. Indigenous folks control much more land in the US than the National Park Service does, and Park Service knows that and does lots of work with tribal nations. I think if there really were resistance, there are also people who you could find who would back you in that inclusion, because it's kind of a no-brainer and it enriches the work tremendously. So I'd be happy to talk about it more. I'm glad to hear you're thinking about it. I'm sorry you can't see me because I feel like I'm having a conversation with you, but
Sorry for a little bit.
turned off. So anyway, yeah, thanks for that response, and happy to talk more if you would like to. I'm going to send you an email anyway, so you'll have my contact.
Absolutely. Thank you. I would very much appreciate that.
Sure.
And thanks for bringing up the subject, because it's something that's not easy. I mean, in some ways it could be, but it's complicated, right? And that's something that is very much on our radar for taking action.
Great. Thanks.
So we had one more kind of follow on. I think it's about this same convening in 2024. If we're in contact with congressional reps to attend, like Grijalva, Gallego. I think, Kathy, that's the convening you're talking about.
Yeah, as of now, we are not right now. Basically, kind of, as I was saying with Sharon, that just because it's in the initial steps and we didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves before one of these agencies says, oh, no, we can't work binationally, which is unfortunately not that uncommon to hear. All it takes is a different administration or a different member in the government and things fall through. Anyways, so as of now, no, there has not been any communication, but that's a great idea. Absolutely.
I'm sure that you could get one or both of those if you give them enough notice. Because like I said, it's an election year, so they're going to be really busy. Well, maybe not Grijalva so much, but Gallego will be.
Okay. Yeah, wonderful point. And the feel I get is Arizona as a state and also Sonora as a state, there's a lot of desire on that level. And that's sometimes a little bit more easy to work with than the federal level between two countries.
You could probably get Kelly to be interested in it too.
Yeah.
He's pretty good about environmental.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathy. That's a great point. Yeah,
and Rhonda posted a resource that might be of interest in the chat, the arizonaTownHall.org cross-border connecting. So I grabbed that. I'll put it in our team chat, so we have that. Thank you, Rhonda.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can check it out. Well, we're a little past 6, so I mean, folks might have other plans to move on to. So I want to say thank you so much for joining us. We still have time if there's any more questions, but I just wanted to take a moment to say if you need to go, and thank you very much for all of your wonderful support, for all this really, I think, exciting and work, just I love the cross-border work and connecting with folks in this way. So thank you for joining us. Any final questions before we close it out? Jump in, it's your big chance. All right. I think we're done. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you all.